My name's Edwin Hill. My father's family was from the Whitford area. My mother was from up in the coal mines. My dad ended up being a tenant farmer. Came to the Marshallton area sometime in the late 1920s, to work at Ted Baldwin's farm, be his tenant farmer. For the first year or so, they lived in a big house because, Ted was out playing baseball, so they lived in the big house. When Ted gave up playing baseball, they moved down to the tenant house, which is now Jack Hines' home. And
now, when you say big house, Ed, what is the big house?
So it's a Baldwin farm where Bunny Meister lives now.
Okay.
They moved out of their dad was one that didn't stay too long in any one place. He then moved to Scunseltown sometime in the early 30s. This was all before I was born. Then in 1934, I was born over in Scunseltown. And at that point, Dad had already decided he was going to move to a farm up in Chester Springs, in which he was working up there while they were still living in the tenant house over at the Glass Farm, which is a farm behind the Grange over at Scunseltown. And he got kicked by a horse, and I was born February 4th. He got kicked by a horse about the 23rd of March, I think it was. Took him to Phoenixville Hospital where he died. So my mother was then 34 years old with 6 kids and probably had a pot to pee in, but not a window to throw it out. So she had to rent a house, and they decided to come back to the Marshallton area, I guess. I don't know. I was too small to know what was going on. But they rented the house 2 doors up here, the half of the double. And
Honey Johnson's place?
Yeah, where Honey and Dave Johnson lived. At that point, when we moved in 1934, it didn't have any running water, had a pump in the kitchen, and a nice outhouse in the backyard, a 2-hole, as a matter of fact.
Family affair.
It was class.
Yeah.
But you didn't like people to join you. So that's how I got them. So since then, I'm still here. Although in 1941, because of our family situation, I went up to what's now the Milton Hershey. It was in the Hershey Industrial School, and spent the next 10 years up there, and only returned to Marshallton for 2 weeks every summer. So my history on Marshallton will be from the late 30s to 1941, and then I'll pick up in 1951 when I came back and got involved in things.
And you said you lived in Jack's house down in the valley. Did you live there or your family lived there?
My family lived there. I was still a gleam in my dad's eye.
Okay.
I was born in Scunseltown.
But you went to the Milton Hershey School.
Milton Hershey School in 1941, graduated in 1951, so that's when I came back home.
Did any of your other siblings go there too, or just you?
Let's start. I had 2 brothers and 3 sisters. Brother Bill was 14 years older than me, and I had a sister, Mary, who was probably 12 years older than me. They both stayed home with their mother and went to Westchester High School. My brother, Charles, or Doc, he went to Milton Hershey. My 2 sisters went to Ellis College down Newtown Square. Now, I went up to the Marshallton School for first year and a half or so. Had Miss McIntyre as a teacher, which no one who ever had her will ever forget. But
so you were at the Milton Hershey School for about 10 years.
I was there from the 2nd grade,
and then you
middle
came
second.
Back to Marshallton after that?
No, I came back to Marshallton.
Right.
My family had moved out up here and had bought the house down in, I'll say Dogtown, which nobody will know where it is, but other than
Suburb
Jack.
of Marshallton.
What? It's a suburb,
of
Marshallton suburb, down at the corner of Northbrook and Wawaset Road, and that's where my nephew still lives.
Okay. So did you run into this guy?
I didn't know Franklin. First time I remember Franklin, really. Now, I may have run into him before that. One St. Patty's Day, and this was probably in the 50s. It was after the firehouse was built, I know. St. Patty's Day came on a Thursday, and Franklin came up there in an orange sweatshirt. And Cliff Reeder, who had the store across the street at that time, had been celebrating St. Patty's Day in different locations, I assume, because he came in there and he got really up one side of Franklin and down the other for wearing orange on St. Patty's Day. I don't know if you remember that, but I
Franklin, you
never
remember
forget.
that?
Since you mentioned it, I remember.
You never wore orange again, did you? Or maybe you were hunting.
I don't know
I
why.
didn't pay much attention to Cliff
What
Reeder.
about Jack Hines?
Jack-
When's the first time you met Jack?
Oh, damn. He was my paper boy.
Jack was.
Yeah.
Did he ever short you?
I don't know whether he cheated me or not when we paid him. But when I was married and lived up here in the apartment, up at what was Andrian's, I don't know who owns it now. It's for sale.
For sale.
Where the Marshallton Nursery used to be. Jane and I lived in the apartment above the garage up there. Because I had to stay in Marshallton or not in Marshallton, we had to stay in West Bradford. Because then I was the township supervisor. I had been elected supervisor in 60, I guess.
All right, we're not going to go.
No, you don't want to get into that. But
Okay, let me just.
that's where I was going to break it.
Yeah. Jack, do you remember delivering papers to Ed's house?
Yes, yes.
Did he give you a good tip?
I don't believe I ever got a tip up there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Plant your corn early.
Jack, you remember delivering papers to Ed Hill?
Yes, did, yeah.
Did he give you a good tip?
I don't recall. I don't think he did. But
I used to
don't know.
I used to deliver
just kidding.
papers too, and
Yeah.
if I was ever shorted when they dropped them off, my worst client, I'd skimp on them.
Yeah.
Franklin, we're going to turn to you here.
All right.
So I know Marshall has a lot of history, so why don't you start out with your family history and background?
Well, the Marshalls had originally had a 1,600-acre pen grant right in this area. And my mother and father settled in Northbrook. My father was born in 1882, and we've been in Northbrook all the time. Of course, different relatives were in Marshall, and the town was named after the family.
Right.
And I have a brother, Edward. He lived in Northbrook all his life. So really, I can't tell you anything, but we were just Northbrookites.
Now, do you trace your roots back to Humphrey Marshall? And
Yeah, it's fourth generation back.
so Franklin, you grew up essentially in Northbrook then.
I grew up in Northbrook.
And how many brothers and sisters? Did
One brother.
Mm-hmm.
And
And what did your father do for a living?
he started out with a threshing rig and a sawmill. I think around the start of it was 1910. And he would saw in the off season. When the threshing season was on, he would do the threshing, and then when the threshing season was over, pull into the sawmill. And he did that for 25 years, from 1910, 25 years, and then he went to work at Unionville School as a heating superintendent, boiler room man. And that's where he retired from.
Now, what was your mother's maiden name? Did she grow up around here?
No, she was a Swaggart. She was from Leola, Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania Dutch. So that's about the history of the Marshalls. They never left Northbrook.
Wasn't she postmaster?
She was postmaster down there. After Frank Shoemaker retired, she was postmaster. I can't give you the exact dates on that. I can't remember that.
Was that in the store that Frank had?
No, the first post office started there in our house.
Okay.
And, it ended up in our house. And she retired, and they didn't continue the post office. They did away with the post office and put it on rural delivery.
Okay. So the train ran through there, and I guess back in the day, it was a regular train stop.
2 trains a day, and the feed mill was there, and there was 2 sidings. There was a siding into the creamery and a siding into the feed mill. But they run 2 steam engines, 2 steam trains a day, morning and evening.
And you could certainly hear the whistle blowing, I guess was
Yeah, well, there was,
commotion and
just put something in, there was one engineer, his name was Berkeyheiser. At Christmas time, he would play jingle bells on the whistle coming through, the little
just for you, right?
little birds.
Yeah.
He'd play jingle bells for us.
Yep, yep. Thank you, Franklin. We're going to come back after a little bit and we'll talk about more growing up, the sawmill,
Yeah.
and other things. So I want to just switch gears for a little bit here and engage all of you in what Marshallton was like. So starting with you, Jack, and all of you, so picture this, you're a kid, a teenager, and just think about when you were here, whether you were here or not. So it's a hot summer's day and night. What'd you do in Marshallton? Was there stuff to do? Did you make your own games up? Did you play sports? Jack?
Well, we would be, I know we spent a lot of time in the fields and like down at the spring, there was a spring down Clayton Road. We'd get down in that area and play in the stream and play in the fields, or we'd come up to here to the Blacksmith Shop. We used to play baseball behind here as we got older. And in the early, my teenage years, or as I started to get a little bit older, they started the fire company in '53, and that was in the back alley here, and they had a fair right here behind the shed. That was in the early part of August, I believe, because they always had cantaloupes with ice cream in them, and
that was a pretty big thing back then. I guess the fair,
the fair would be held in the back here.
It was right in the alleyway back here?
And right behind the Blacksmith Shop, mostly in the grass back here. Yeah, because they kept the alley open because fire trucks would come down there. Fire truck, I guess, at that point. Yeah, so
They parked in the meadow, or the other side of the fence, because there was a barn there at that time, which before it
Do you
burned down.
remember that fair?
Oh, the fair. I was chairman of the fair
was
for
it a
10
big-
years.
Got all the kids from around town and the outskirts too, or was it mainly a town event?
well, people would come from other places. I mean, back then, local fairs were people would travel from the nearest town to the local fair. Every town had a little fair for some reason or other, and so it was just they have little games and things, and it was just a fun thing to do. Usually like that was around the time you would have some fruit or something, like the cantaloupe would be ripe, and they'd always sell cantaloupe with ice cream in them. And and then the Grange would have the peach festival when the peaches came in.
That's down in Northbrook.
Well, that was originally here, and then they moved to Northbrook. Yeah.
Franklin, do you remember the fire company fair? Did you get up here, or were
Oh,
you?
yeah.
And
It started back here. It was back here for about 3 or 4 years. Now I was in my 20s at this point. But then it moved up to behind the school, on the school property. It used to run, I don't know, you used to run at least 2 weekends. Sometimes we tried to make it go for the whole week. We had Sally Starr there one night. We always had Warren Mercer and his band there.
really, wow. So that was a pretty.
Oh, we used to have tug of wars from the fire companies. We'd come out and have tug of wars. For the kids, we had a pie eating contest. Unfortunately, I was usually the MC up on the stage, so I'd pick blueberry and cherry pie, and they had to eat it without using their hands. So they used to get messed up. but I don't remember what we gave them as a prize, probably an old paper layer or something, but the kids used to get into that. And for the adults, we had a big 6-wheel and a little 6-wheel, which was strictly a gambling situation, which we had some people in Marshall went to the district attorney and asked him whether it was legal. And he, of course, had to say no, but he wasn't going to break it up.
So it was a fun event for the families in Marshallton. Were there other events that brought families together in Marshallton, say on holidays? Franklin, we were talking about the cakewalk earlier. I guess that was an event down in Northbrook,
Yeah.
but it involved Marshallton people.
Yeah.
How did that get started?
I don't know. I guess just the community people got together, but it was an annual event. I think it was in August, if I'm not mistaken.
It was part of the Peach Festival.
Yeah, Peach Festival. The cakewalk was Harry Perdue always performed that, and he had wherever he stopped when the music stopped, that's who got the cake. But there was one route there in the yard, and that was a famous route because every year that was where he stopped on that route. You knew where he was going to stop before he stopped.
That didn't sound fair.
No, it wasn't fair, but you know Harry too.
Too well.
Ed, when you talked about the fair, I remember it used to be a high wire act.
We brought in, one year we went all out, brought in a guy that went up some kind of breakaway pole.
Yeah.
I remember that was when we ran the fair for 2 weeks in a row, I think it was, or a whole week, one or the other. Because I know he stayed with Biddy Ross up here in his house. It was one of those deals where he'd get up there and stand on his head on top of the pole and do all this kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden the top of the pole would break like this. And it was hinged, of course. And that would be the big ending of it. But when Sally Starr came out, I remember that was the first time I ever saw a car. She had a big pink Cadillac. First time I saw a car where you had a push button in on the dash where the trunk would go up. I mean, this was back in the 50s when cars were still learning how to do things. And she'd hand out bubble gum to the kids, and she kept her bubble gum back there. And one other event, which neither one of these two will probably remember, back in the late 30s and very early 40s, there was a Marshallton horse show, which was down on Telegraph Road at the Renshaw Farm. I don't know who lives at the Renshaw Farm now, but it's a farm at the corner of Telegraph and Waltz Road. I think the Roland people lived in there at one time or something, but Renshaw had it, and out in the middle field there, they had a big horse show. And
was that part of the fair, or was that a separate?
No, this was well before the fire.
Okay.
This was when I was knee-high to a grasshopper. And because I remember, we'd get 25 cents and be able to get down to the horse show, and you'd get a hot dog or something down there. But I know the Cans had horses. Mary Can, there's somebody you probably should talk to, the Can girls.
Mm-hmm.
The three of them two of them are older than I am, and they're still around. So.
No, we plan to.
But,
was the fire company fair a fundraiser for the fire company?
Oh yeah, it was the fire company's big fundraiser for the year. I mean, we thought we were really wealthy. We used to make $2,000 or $3,000 on it. Thought we were really doing great guns.
So while you were talking about the fire company, I think historically there was always fires in Marshallton. Am I right?
There's always fires.
Recollect any in particular that were worse than others? I understand there was an arsonist way back in the day. I don't know if he burned 4 barns down.
Yeah, I remember the Moore barn down at the bottom of Sugar Bridge Hill. I think his name was Robb, R-O-B-B. He was in his early 20s.
I can add to that. That was,
I don't know whether he was related to Harry Robb or not.
Yeah, he was in the World War II, and he was in demolition. In other words, when the troops went through, didn't leave anything for the enemy. They'd burn everything down. And that's what he did. And he also burnt the Allerton farm down there, Cornwell's. Remember that?
Yeah.
He burnt 2 or 3 barns before they got him. And he ended up in the Norristown Mental Hospital.
Yeah.
And my cousin Vance Matlick, which these fellows know, knew him real well and would go to see him very frequently. And he arranged for him to get out if he would be responsible for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I know he'd bring this, I'm trying to think, I know his name as well as his first name. I can't come up with it, but anyhow, he'd bring him down there to fish and the brandy wine in the evenings, you know, and keep him kind of busy, and rehabilitated him.
About what year was that? What time period?
I'd say it was probably the late 40s.
Yeah, that's what I was going to
Late
say.
40s.
It was right after the war.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
it was
so
late 40s.
late
About
40s.
48, 49, somewhere around there.
From what I read, though, I think he was well, there was a series of fires, barns, about 4, is from what I heard, that burnt down within a short period of time, and so he was the one that they originally.
Well, that's what I remember about it. Donald Robb was his name.
Yeah, Donald Robb.
Yeah, that was
Took
before
me a
my
while to
time.
run that through these gears.
But you talk the fire company, other fires, 2 fires that I remember were the cause of the forming of fire company up here. Was Harry Cann's garage burn. Now the Cans, of course, were the wealthy people of Marshallton,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of controlled a lot of the people in Marshallton. Like my brother worked for them in Eskoke, and so that was one of the big pushes. And Mike Chambers had, after he moved his store across the street to the front of the Spit and Chew,
Right.
he had some kind of malfunction of a piece of equipment or something, and
Burned
it
out.
caught fire, and they had to wait for Westchester to come out.
Yeah, I thought Downingtown put that out.
Well, they had to wait for somebody. I
Yeah,
was
remember
working for a living at that
yeah,
time. I don't
your
know.
brother Ed told me he heard the Downingtown Fire Department. I guess he was living on Sugars Bridge Road at that point.
Yeah, he would have been. Yeah, he
And-
moved
and-
there in '47.
And he said he heard back then all the fire hose had brass couplings on it. And he said he heard the couplings hitting the street off the back of the fire truck, and woke up and then saw, and it was because they used the pool down where Doc Ullman used to live.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they pumped water from to put the fire out, because the building didn't burn down, just burned out the store.
Yeah, it didn't. The building didn't burn; just was the interior. But that started, and people like Ship Willing, who lived on a farm down there on Northbrook Road. Tom Yerkes lived on Clayton Road. He was secretary of the board of the Star Roses, I guess it was.
Right.
And Gay Godwin, who lived down on Broad Run Road. And unfortunately, Dave Johnson, who lived up the street here. They all they're the ones that got the paperwork done to organize the fire company. And I remember at that point, I was working in at Wyeth, where my brother worked. And they had a big meeting over here in the Grange Hall. I call it the Grange Hall, I don't know what it's had a lot of names. And for people to sign up and become members of the fire company. And I know Brother Bill and I went down and joined it. Now, he didn't become active in the fire company for a few years.
When you went to service.
Well, I did become active, and he didn't until I was drafted into the Army, and then he took my place, and I came back, and hell, he's chief. So,
Do you remember the barn back here burning down?
yes,
Yeah,
I was at
you
that
guys.
fire. Yes. Now, the fire company was active at that point.
And that was McAllister's barn, I think.
Yeah,
Is that
I don't
correct?
know whether they.
I always
guess they
call it
owned that.
McAllister's. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's matter of fact, the township used to keep their trucks in there.
Right back here.
Yeah.
We always assumed here in the blacksmith shop that could have been the original barn to the blacksmith shop here, because obviously they built wagons and did blacksmithing work. Do you have any recollection of that being?
No idea. To me, it was McAllister's. I guess Johnson's lived there. Lee Johnson lived there when I was real little. And then McAllister bought it. They moved from over in their farm over in Lucky Hill Road. Because during the Second World War, on the south side of the alley down here, all along there was a big victory garden. He let people make victory gardens in there. I know my mother had one out there. Old Bob was Harry Perdue's horse, and he'd go around and plow up gardens and victory gardening. You'd hear when Harry was plowing, he'd be out there and say, "Come on, Bob, can't you holler when I stop?" And he meant it the other way around, but Harry was kind of a character.
So let me ask you all a question about Marshallton and the people that lived in Marshallton. Would you consider, I mean, we talked about the fairs and people getting together, and I believe that a lot of families, they lived here and their kids lived here and their houses passed down. Would you consider Marshallton a cliquish place? Everyone kept to themselves, or were they more outgoing? How would you describe the people that lived here back in the day?
I don't know about back in the day, but I'll start this because I had an experience here a couple months ago. I was out to dinner with a group, and one of the women who had moved here, not just moved here, but she'd only lived here maybe 20 years, so, but she was complaining about how when she moved here, she went up to the firehouse and to an auxiliary meeting and just felt like they didn't even want her in there. Those old women wouldn't even talk to her. And I said, "Wait a minute, you're talking about my mother and my wife?" But you had to earn your dues.
I always
guess.
heard that if you weren't born in Marshallton, you couldn't consider yourself a Marshallton resident. I always thought of Jack as a Marshallton resident. He said, "Well, I wasn't born here, so I can't be considered a Marshallton resident." Was that the feeling of the people back then, Jack?
Well, yeah, if you were born here, you were considered a Marshallton resident. And I always felt that until I outlived all those folks, I wasn't a Marshallton person. But now they're all gone. I'm still here, so
Yeah.
I'm a Marshallton person there, and Ed Hill's still here. Yeah. So.
No, I wasn't born here either.
But there was a lot of the families were related. I mean, the Shoemaker girls married Busby and a Trimble, and
Yeah, I just learned. I didn't know Vance Matlick was your cousin.
yeah, I didn't know that either.
Yeah, my brother married a girl who lived across the street up here, the Moores.
Right.
I had to go clear to Westchester to get a wife, but
Yeah, the other ones knew you too well.
Don't tell them too much.
So speaking of Westchester, if you went shopping, were there stores in town here you would go to, or would you go into Westchester on a Friday night? Was that something you did? I mean, was Westchester a place to go, or did you have enough happening around here that you didn't need to?
Well, for
Where'd you go?
we went Westchester.
Yeah.
My mother worked in there at it was American stores back then, and she took the car, and on the Saturday night was shopping night years ago, and every other week we'd walk to Westchester, and the first place we hit was the ice cream store, Maracas, and then she'd get done work, we'd come home with her, but we'd have to walk to Westchester. We have no other way there.
I didn't have to walk, but I remember my mother didn't have a car and she never drove.
A typical day, whether it's summer, spring, or fall, was there a lot of people walking the streets? What was the traffic situation like? Was the town dead or was it lively? What was the feel of town back then?
Well, at that time there wasn't as much traffic as there is now.
Sure.
As a matter of fact, if you got into the Second World War, when gasoline was rationed and tires were rationed and people didn't drive much at all. As I said, there was a short line bus that went through here. My mother would get on that every Friday morning and I'd have to go along because I was a little kid at home, and she'd go into the Great Market in Westchester and do her shopping and ride that bus back home again. But there were, as I said, there was a little store over here. And I don't remember who had the big store uptown, up on the corner of Strasburg and Sugar's Bridge, where the doctor's office used to be, and
Right
it's now
up here.
apartments.
Yeah, when I was younger, it was Arkle Junta, but it
Yeah,
had to
but
be someone
before him was Mike
Yeah.
Chambers. Mike had it for years, and Horace Keller's father, what was his name? George Keller. He worked for him. They lived in the other half of the house where we lived, and they would. Mike had a great store, and that's where we always went to get the ice cream. But then Mike had one problem. Mike liked to go to the horse tracks, and he ended up losing the store. He and his mother had it, I guess. It was Elizabeth and Michael Chambers, I think, or Elizabeth Chambers and son. Then Mike moved across the street to the front of the Spit and Chew and had a store, and Arkle Junta took over the big store.
Right.
Now, Arkle had problems because he wasn't a Marshallton person, and that just wouldn't work too well.
Now, at the corner in the alley on Sugarfish Road, there used to be a little store there.
Yep.
Is Sadie Wallace or
Sadie Wallace had a little store
What is his
there.
name? Hen?
Ralph and Sadie.
Ralph Wallace.
Ralph and Sadie Wallace.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, I was talking about doing this with Doug Barr the other day. And he said, oh, yeah, we're talking about that little store. And he said, yeah, that's where after school we'd stop there and get candy on our way home.
Right.
So there was a little store there now. I don't know what it is now. I guess it's empty because it was for rent a couple weeks ago.
So you mentioned the Spit and Chew, Ed.
Spit and Chew.
What was the Spit and Chew?
Spit and Chew is an old men's club. Now, I don't know who owned that building. Somewhere in my mind, I keep associating Ralph Wallace with it, but I'm not sure whether he owned that or not.
Now this was where the Four Dog Tavern is now.
It's the
correct?
back part of the Four Dog Tavern.
Back in where the bar is now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Sonny, Mrs. Wallace lived upstairs, so the Wallaces may have owned that because.
Yeah, Sadie and Ralph lived up there after they moved away from Sugar's Bridge Road, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So that's what I associate that with Ralph Wallace. So I don't know whether he owned it, but or maybe the Cans owned it. They owned most stuff in Marshall at that point. But it was a club where the old men used to go up after dinner at night, and where Spit and Chew tells you what they went up for, but it was for smoking cigars and so forth. They had a shuffleboard and a pool table both in there.
I don't
know
remember
about
the
pool
pool table.
table.
I
had the
think
shuffleboard.
when I went in there, it was only shuffleboard.
Well, okay.
And then when they moved it over to the firehouse, then they had a pool table.
Yeah, we had a pool table over there.
And was the Spit and Chew the only place in the Four Dog, or wasn't there a grocery store
Well,
there?
the
grocery
front
store
was
was
a
in the
grocery
front.
store.
On the
Yeah.
front.
This was in the back by the heater. And they, they had mostly the empty soda bottles were stacked back there. There's a door in the back where they'd get the produce in and stuff. And then there was an apartment up. Well, the stairs to the apartment were behind there.
Yeah, it was in the
Yeah.
back end.
Yeah.
And then later, it became, they had 4 or 5 different little, turned the Spit and Chew into 4 or 5 little stores. I remember one in particular that I remember was a necktie store, because the same people that had the one down the Flanders Hotel in Ocean City had it. And they had a store there that sold geos. Is that what they're called? Those rocks that had things in the middle of them that were a big fad at that time. Now that's not, I don't think, ancient history. That's
Now,
the
when you
60s.
was younger, you said it was a place where the older men went to.
yeah.
Would you hang out? Would they let kids in, or was it
I
pretty
was
much off limits to?
I was never in it until I came home from Hershey.
Mm-hmm.
And but I did hear that one of the family stories is that my brother Charles had the name of Doc. Everybody called him Doc Hill. And that came because he used to go up there and hang out with them. And he was the type of guy that had all the answers to everything. And they started calling him Dr. Hill because he knew everything. I mean, this is when he was 5 and 6 years old. And that stuck with him till the day we took him out to Birmingham. So
Did they have sidewalks back in the day?
Yes.
Brick sidewalks?
Yeah.
Some were brick, some were concrete.
Yep. And no two were alike.
Mm-hmm.
No.
That was one of the things. Everybody had a different brick pattern in their sidewalks, so it wouldn't be like anyone else's. And a lot of the bricks came from Lucan's, and when they lined the steel mill, the furnaces over there, everybody'd bring their used brick home, and that's what a lot of the brick were, like in the sidewalks and stuff here in Marshallton, were used brick that they brought home from the mills.
Yeah, I know when we did the streetscapes project, one of the big issues was all the different brick patterns, which are documented somewhere.
Yeah, there was not. Well, you and I walked to town, and there was not one brick pattern that matched another one all through town. Everybody had their own.
But you got to realize now when you got out to the poorer section there in the western end of town, they didn't have any sidewalks out there.
He's talking about where I lived.
Where he grew up. Yeah.
Where'd you go to church?
Fortunately, because Marshallton Methodist Church was up the street, that's where I went. I have a certificate at home from 1937, where I graduated from the kindergarten to the first grade in Sunday school.
Okay.
I
How
got
about you, Franklin? Were you part of the...
I was in Northbrook Chapel. My grandmother started the chapel in Northbrook.
Is that still there?
It's a house now, but it's just.
What kind of congregation would you get? Just the
Well,
local Northbrook people? Or was there
it
a
finally
denomination?
dwindled. They had as high as 70 at one time, but it dwindled to nothing. Then the Grange Marshallton Grange bought it and had the Grange down there.
Okay. Jack, where'd you go to church?
I went to Holy Trinity in Westchester, as we were originally from Westchester, and my father was always a member of the Holy Trinity Church, so we went into Holy Trinity.
Well, I had one of them pins that you had the bars on. Had bars go down my belly button.
You talk about that. That brings somebody to mind. Maggie Mercer.
Right.
Now, Maggie Mercer was a woman that lived in half a double house up. It's now torn down. It's up by the church.
The Methodist church.
The Methodist church, yeah. The only church that counts in Marshall, not the Methodist. And she delivered the papers in Marshall. Now, she was, I don't know how old Maggie was. Maggie was an old woman as long as I can remember. And she would come to Sunday school, and she had, like Franklin said, she had a row of ribbons or row of bars for where her perfect attendance down in front of her. But when Maggie delivered the paper, she could tell you some of the raunchiest jokes.
You're going to say she was a hard old dude.
She was. Man, and she had an outhouse in her backyard. I don't know whether it was running. I don't think it was ever running water in that house.
I don't think, no.
I helped tear it down, but I don't remember. But she said she wanted to keep living there because she could sit in the outhouse and crack the door open and look out and see her husband's grave. Keep her eye on it.
Right.
So.
And that was her son Lawrence.
She had a son, Lawrence,
was there.
And then the other Ed Mercer, was he Eddie?
I just knew Lawrence.
Lawrence was the tall, thin, and then Eddie was the heavy set one.
Wasn't one of them they called Tiny?
Yeah, that's the heavy set
He
one.
was heavy, but he was a great drinker. He'd sit up there at the bar.
Yeah, and then he'd go over and sit on the steps at the store.
Yeah.
His mother was Helen Mercer. They lived across the street. I don't know who his father was because she had remarried by the time I remember her. But
Well, I can remember going up to the store when Cliff Reeder had it, and standing there, and Maggie came in, and this is like you said, she was always old, but she would help herself to things off the shelf and put them in her pocket.
she'd steal you blind.
And so I said something. I said, Cliff, Maggie's over there helping herself to stuff. And he said, yeah, I know that. She doesn't have much, and that's how she feeds herself. And he just didn't pay any attention to her, and that was that. Mm-hmm. She walked out of the store with what she needed. Yeah.
What about the Marshallton Inn? What do you remember the Marshallton Inn? Was it a bar back then? Was it a
it's
hotel or?
It was always a bar, and Hen and Jeffries lived. It wasn't as big as it is now. The back part wasn't on it, but they lived in the rest of it. Just where the bar is now was the bar. That's the only thing I remember.
Just a working man's bar, I'd call it,
Yeah,
wouldn't you?
yeah.
It's had a dartboard in there,
In the bar part.
in the bar side.
Now, was that bar original or was that basically the same as it was?
It's
as
the
it is
same
today?
room's the
Same
room's the same.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's the same bar or
Did
not.
Baldwin kind of redo the whole thing?
Baldwin redid it when he bought it, and made the dining rooms and stuff. But I don't recall whether he changed the bar. It was always dark in there. I can remember seeing. I don't know what you see different. You still can't see anything in there.
When Hen Jeffries had
Maybe
the,
that's a good thing, right?
when Hen Jeffries had the good pickled pig's feet. Now Hen, there was a dining room upstairs or something because I remember Hen used to have a what's bear meat called? Bear meat, I guess. But somebody'd shoot a bear and then he'd cook it and they'd invite different members or people. It was the greasiest damn meat you ever tasted. But
And they always had chili there, didn't they? Didn't they have chili in the bar?
yeah, they'd have different things. Pud Newman was the bartender.
Okay.
He worked daytimes out at Emeryville Hospital, and then at night he'd tend bar up there. And I remember one night he had to flag. Hen owned the place, but he got a few too many drinks one night sitting at the bar. And Pud had to flag him and cut him off. But no, the people in the Spit and Chew, I guess, kind of ended up going over there and shooting darts. I remember Thursday night after work at the firehouse, I used to end up over there and shoot darts a few times. I remember I went in there and what was drinking? 21 at that point.
Yeah, it was 21.
Yeah, went in there and I'd been going in there for 4 or 5 years, 3 or 4 years probably at that point. And so I said to Hen, I'm 21 years old. He said, you've been drinking in here for years. What do you mean you're 21?
So, looking back when you gentlemen grew up here, is there anything that's not here that you remember very well back then? And how do you think Marshallton's changed? Obviously, the traffic's gotten increased and families have moved on, but is there anything you miss about Marshallton in particular? Jack?
No, I don't think I mean, the center house was there, of course, and that was full of renters. There was tenants, a lot of families, the Williams, the Bozzards, who was the guy that always kind of walked sideways with his tongue hanging out the side of his mouth. Always did all the digging when they dug, when the sewage has problems all around the center house. He was always digging trenches out there, and they designed the house.
Not Frankie DiMatteo.
No, not Frank. Frankie owned it. It was, God, what is his name? He was involved with the fire company a bit, and ended up working. Buzzy, yeah.
Oh, Buzzy Preston.
Preston. Buzzy Preston, yeah.
Oh.
Lived in the back there. That was one of the nicer apartments. He and his parents, I guess, then he built a house out in Crestmont Farms.
And
Yeah.
moved out to Shady Side.
But there was a lot of folks in that building at one point.
He took
And then
the
there
fire
was-
engine out one night you remember he drove the fire engine?
Yeah, Bill Hill gave him hell.
It stayed in second gear all the time.
Yeah, he was there, and somebody didn't come fast enough, so he drove the truck. Was never trained to drive the truck.
He was never in a truck before, I don't think.
You remember Passmore that used to live in there? He lived up on the second floor.
Yes, yeah.
And of course, he used to sit up there at the window all the time,
Yep.
look out. He was the last tenant, I think, of the center house.
Right, yeah.
And a group of us from the firehouse carried him out of there on a chair.
Oh wow, yeah.
I think he ended up in Pocopson Home.
Well, I think, was he related to the Wallaces? There was some Wallaces that lived in the center house, or the Williams. He was related to some of those folks up.
I don't know. There was Hensons that lived in there at that time.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Eddie Henson.
Well, the Hensons and Williams were
relatives.
related. I think Mrs. Henson was a Williams,
No.
Ed's wife, wasn't she?
They were related. Yeah, the Williamses. I forgot,
Yeah, yeah.
about them.
But there was a drugstore where that.
I think she was a Henson.
Yeah.
I know Betty Amarillo was a ensign.
Right, yeah.
She's still alive.
Yeah.
Up at the Telhigh.
The, in front of there was a drugstore, was Kaler's Drugstore, you remember
Yeah,
that?
Kaler had a drugstore
Yeah.
where that little apartment building is right behind there. That started out as a drugstore with an apartment up
It had a
above.
little soda fountain in there, and you could get soda. Catherine Fling was the soda jerk.
Oh yeah, I don't
Yeah.
remember that.
Yeah, and in fact, I still have the milkshake machine from in there. I still use it. Probably too often, but yeah, I still have
He
that.
wasn't the most pleasant person,
No.
as I remember. That's
You
why.
remember the old gas station down the road? It used to be Spalding's.
Yeah, well, that was Geisel. Hey, Jake Geisel built that probably in the early '50s or something.
Geisel was
Yeah.
the first one I remember,
Yeah.
and then Os Fowler
Yeah.
took it over. Or no, oh, that
That
one
was the
down there.
corner.
I'm talking about
Yeah.
the one here in the
Yeah.
forks of the road.
Jake was here, and then he built
Geisel
that
was here,
down
and then he
there.
built that one down
Yeah.
there.
And they lived in 1/3 of it for years. They lived in that one side.
Before he built the house out
Yeah,
back.
before he built the house up. Yeah.
And Os Fowler took this one over. And he had it, well, he was fire chief. That was an event from the past in the fire company. One night we had a baseball team. And we used to play down the meadow at Baldwin's farm, down along the Brandywine. And one night we were down there practicing and we heard the fire alarm go off, the siren. And so, of course, we all got in our cars and came up to go to the fire. And Ev Russell was catching, so he had all his equipment on and he had to take that off, so he was the last one coming. And we came over the hill here, Tangy's, what I call Tangy's Hill, there on Northbrook Road. He met the fire truck and was killed. And Os Fowler was driving the fire truck,
Right.
as I recall. And you could see there were steps up into that brick house, and you could, from the road, and you could see where the fire truck was running over that step, trying to get over as far as it could.
Mm-hmm.
And Ev came up there too fast and hit that fire truck. And we were without a fire truck for a few years. You weren't active then, were you?
No, I was too young.
Uh,
I can remember they had, for a while, they had trailers like from the Second World War that hook on a Jeep and they had all the equipment in them. I can remember going with Ernie Fling when the mill, where they, over in Downingtown, where the mill lane.
Dickings paper.
Yeah, the paper mill burnt down
There.
and they took everything over there in trailers and
That was
pumped
July.
out of the creek.
It was on July 4th, I think, wasn't it? If I'm right, I don't know. It was a real hot day, I know that. But originally, then after that fire truck, we bought an engine from the city of Wilmington. The first truck we had, they bought from over in Bristol, fire company in Bristol. It was a second-hand truck. That was the one that was in the accident. And it was totaled, so we bought a truck from the city of Wilmington. Didn't have being a city truck, why it didn't have a windshield, wasn't any cab over the driver, nothing. And we bring it out here in the country and try to drive that thing on a winter day, wearing goggles and all this and that. And remember once we couldn't get it started when, I think it was when Barry's pig farm burned. We couldn't get the thing started, the battery was dead, so we had to push it out and down the alley and get it started coming down the alley to get down to Barry's for the pig farm fire.
Yeah, I forgot. I remember the goggles used to hang on a gear shift.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you put them on the drive. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Do you, and you're probably remember this more than maybe Jack, but during World War II, Korea, was it noticeably different? I know there was a number of boys from Marshallton and West Bradford killed in action, and Franklin, I don't know if you knew any of them back then either, but what was it like growing up in those days?
My memories of that, of course, was mainly up at Hershey. The war started
Okay.
after I went to Hershey. But I came home for my brother Bill's wedding, December the 11th, 1944. And he was in the Air Force at that point. He was home on leave and he was getting married, he and Nancy Moore from across the street. And that day, now our house, as I said, didn't have running water. We had electric, but we didn't have a telephone. So we had to use McAllister's telephone. And I remember a call came to McAllister's, or somebody came to McAllister's. I remember my mother standing in the dining room looking out the window crying. And I thought, well, Bill's getting married, what? And here the McAllisters had gotten word that day that their son Bill was killed over in Germany, over in Europe. Now, sometime also during the war, and I don't remember when because I wasn't around that much, but the people that lived in the other half of our house, which was Keller's, Horace Keller was also killed in the Second World War. So people on both sides of our house were killed. And the minister's son, Eshelman, he was killed.
Right.
And Chess Hall was captured and a prisoner of war. Now the Halls lived with a house in there, and we tore it down to build a firehouse, didn't we? Yeah. They lived in that, up where the firehouse is now. And
So there was a significant amount of boys killed in action that really had an impact back then.
it did.
Yeah, well, for the size of the population.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, they're all on a monument down in
Yeah.
the cemetery.
Yeah. Yeah.
There wasn't, the population wasn't that great around here. It might have been 1,000 people in West Bradford
It
back
wasn't
then.
that much. I think
Yeah.
it was only like 900 or something
And
when I was a supervisor.
Lose eight fellows. It was-
So you predominantly
people.
had people in town, and then I guess the country people that lived out in the farms. There wasn't any much development going on. When were the two developments put in? The Manor and
Marshallton Farms was put in around 1960, 61. something like that.
61. It was
Yeah.
right after I
Yeah.
became a supervisor. That was the first development after I became a supervisor.
so that must have really been something big back then, where you really got an influx of people.
Yeah.
And then that was Marshallton Farm, Marshallton Manor. Since I live in one of the first houses that was built, we moved in '65, so they probably started that in '64. And they went down and did 4 or 5 houses along Telegraph there on what they call that Valley View or something like
yeah.
that.
And
And
then
Schmidt and Nice were the builders from Westchester. Then they went over on the Hall Road. In fact, I drove down Hall Road today. Every time I get down there, I figure one of the biggest mistakes I ever made as a township supervisor was approving that subdivision
And
where
those
they got those
driveways.
damn driveways about like this going up.
All right, we're gonna get to that in a second, so just hold up on that. Do you gentlemen remember Hurricane Hazel of '54?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
You lived right along the Brandywine. What was that like, Franklin?
Well, that was one of the biggest floods we ever had. We had the biggest, two of the biggest floods were 42 and 72. 72.
72, yeah.
Even larger than Hazel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hazel was more wind, as I remember.
Yeah.
We had 4 or 5 big silver maples in our yard, and it tore them up. Yeah, they were old, but it really tore them. I was in the Army then, and I remember coming home on leave and helping my daddy clean up the yard.
Well, that 72, that was, we didn't actually get the hurricane, but there was a storm associated with
Yeah,
Agnes.
yeah, and I can't-
Agnes, wasn't it?
I
And we
think
had
it's
that-
Agnes, yeah, you're
That
right.
was a big flood. Yeah.
Agnes.
So you've been living along the Brandywine there. You've seen a lot of flooding over the years.
Quite
Um,
3 or 4 major floods.
Has it gotten worse, do you think, in recent times?
No,
Yeah.
it's
So it's always been.
actually it's slacked off in the last couple of years.
How about the blizzard of '58?
Well,
Were
that's
you around then?
yeah, that crushed my daddy's sawmill. It was 38 inches of snow on the level, and it was wet snow. I can
Yeah.
remember him going out there trying to prop it up. It was cracking. It was an old building, and I told him, I said, "Get out from under there. You're going to be a statistic." And he come out, I says, I'll put a shed over. He was worried about the equipment. He was well up in years. And he said, I don't want the equipment to get wet. Well, I said, I'll put a shed over it when it gets done, you know. And that's when I put the pole shed up there in metal shed.
Coming back to the fire company real quickly, and just tie up a few loose ends. So, if there was a fire, how would the fire company find out about the fire, and how would the people that were the volunteers find out about it and get up to the firehouse?
Well, originally, I don't remember where the calls came in originally, when the firehouse was up here in the alley. I know the siren was there on poles right beside it, and there was a switch inside the firehouse you'd pull to blow the siren. But I don't remember how the calls came in.
I think they came into Dave Johnson's house because they had it wired from his house up to the
Was it?
firehouse. I think Dave
I don't
had
remember
the
that.
original
I just
call.
don't-
Yeah, you'd get the calls in there.
But you got then the firemen themselves only found out, they'd hear the siren and then you had to go to the firehouse to find out. And then eventually we got to plectrons,
Yeah.
which was,
But I'll tell you, Dave or Austin Fowler had a phone at his store because I can remember had a button on it that he'd push to set the siren off from
oh,
down
all
there.
right, yeah.
Yeah, so it might have been those two places. Then they expanded a little bit later because every time Bell would work on the wires out here, they'd set the siren off because they touched the wrong wire. Yeah.
Where Dave's family live?
Dave's family lived down the house where Marshallton Nursery used to be.
The Woodward house. We call it the Woodward
I
house.
don't know what one that has a common, used to have a common driveway with,
Right.
with Harvey. Or
Where
with-
Cider's nursery
Yeah,
used to be.
reciters. That's where when I was a kid, that's where Dave,
Okay.
when he married Honey Johnson, who was daughter of the blacksmith,
Ludwig.
Ludwig. She was Honey Ludwig.
Okay. So was Dave always an honorary?
He was always a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
That type of thing. Yeah. He
Excuse
knew
the French.
He knew
Yeah.
everything.
You're being kind.
Did you ever play any mischief on him, or?
Yeah.
But I'll say one thing for him. He was involved in a lot. I mean, sometimes you didn't want him, but he was involved in a lot. He meant well, but he just didn't. He wasn't a people person. That was his problem. Yeah, we didn't talk much about Ludwig's and the blacksmith shop. But
We're going to do that, sure.
okay, go ahead.
But you were asking about the fire company, and when the fire company was in the back alley, they had a radio. You know, there wasn't any central dispatch. So when the trucks, when they got radios, they didn't have radios immediately. When they got radios, they had bought the house where the firehouse is now, and under the stairway they put in a radio, and Honey Johnson would always come up, and she'd be the radio operator. So if you
Okay.
needed something, you'd radio back, and she'd call another company or alert the ladies auxiliary who'd come out and the sandwiches and stuff. And there was a light on a porch out front, and because you didn't know whether the fire trucks were out or not because they're in the back alley. And so when she'd go up there to operate the radio, she'd turn it. There was a red light on her front porch. So we always used to tease her about having a red light whenever she was there. And you know, if you came home from work or something, you saw the red light on, you'd stop, find out where the fire is.
Okay.
So you could go out to find out, you know, where they were, or you needed help or something like that. So
So you had your
Yeah.
own secret password
yeah,
or code.
right, yeah.
Interesting. So gentlemen, we're going to go forward now. I'm going to dwell on each of you individually here for a little bit. So with that, Franklin, you're on the hot seat.
I am.
You grew up in Northbrook, but your family goes way back here in Marshallton. Tell us a little bit about, start out with Northbrook, the sawmill, the old mill that used to be along the Brandywine. Just start with the sawmill.
Well, the old sawmill was just below that little bridge on the Brandywine. Like I say, it burnt in 18...
Was it part of the mill then, the sawmill?
Yeah, it was a sawmill and grist mill.
Okay.
It burnt in 1898.
And was that the Marshall mill?
Yeah,
Okay.
that was a Marshall mill, but it was never rebuilt. And in 1910, my daddy was born in 1882. And in 1910, he bought a steam engine, a thrashing rig, and a sawmill. And that's when he built the building that I have pictures of there. It was crushed in 1958 with the 58 snow, the building.
That's
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So you operated the sawmill for many, many years.
well, yeah, he passed away in '63, and my brother and I took it over, and we ran it till '87. And then our mainstay was the farmers. We did a lot of custom work. In other words, the farmers wanted to build a corn crib or fix a barn for, they'd go to the woods and cut the timber, bring it in, and we'd mill it.
Mm-hmm.
And we did a little bit of buying and selling, but not a whole lot. But the farmers were gone. That's what really put us out.
Right.
King Ranch was a good customer,
Mm-hmm.
and they're gone. They were gone. We did have a fair amount of business out of Longwood Garden. They mill a lot of. They had some woods over there and had some pretty good timber in it, and they cut some out of there. Specifically, a lot of walnut at one time, and but then after all that happened, it just died, and we couldn't make enough money to run two families.
Mm-hmm.
So we just had to bail out.
Yeah. Now the old mill you said that burnt down. What year was that it burnt down?
It burnt down in 1898.
That was the Marshall mill.
Yeah. It was up and down. It wasn't a circular mill, it was an up and down mill. It only cut
Mm-hmm.
on the down, a roomp like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my daddy always said you could start a cut and sit down and read the newspaper until it got to the other, it wasn't fast. And you can tell if you go down there to the orchard store, he cut lumber for that barn there where the orchard store is.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go in there and look at the timbers, you can see timber that was cut on the up and down mill and the circular mill.
Okay.
Some of those beams have straight lines on them, and others are circular. That's the up and down mill was a straight curves.
So that was probably old for its time back then.
Yeah, I don't think he cut any of that,
Yeah.
but he cut the circular.
Do you recall, was the mill a stone mill or was it a stone foundation? Uh-huh.
I think the old mill, I'm pretty sure the old mill was all stone. But
So
I've never.
When it burnt down, they obviously took it all.
Well, there's a lot. If you walk down in there, there's a lot of stone there. Of course, over the years, from 1898, now in the different floods, it's mudded
Yeah.
over. And,
Yeah.
But
But that was the original Marshall mill
that was the original mill.
Marshallton first started.
Yeah.
They used to bring.
Yeah.
And do you remember the covered bridge down there?
Yeah. They tore it down in '53.
And that
was
it didn't
the
burn
old-
down, and they tore it down.
They tore it down. That was the oldest covered bridge in North America. In today's world, they wouldn't let them take that down
Right.
for historic, but
That was the oldest in North
the
America.
oldest covered bridge in North America. I got pictures of it there, and a caption that tells you the history of it.
Well, we'd like to see that.
Well, it's right there.
Okay.
I got pictures of it being torn down and pictures of it being put back.
Now, I do have a question. When you operated the sawmill, most of the years you operated, you had a steam engine there.
We had the steam engine till '65.
Seemed like it was
And then
longer
we
than
went-
that to me.
Huh?
Seemed like it was longer than that to me.
Well, and then we went to diesel. The steam engine was, my daddy was a steam man. If he knew we went to diesel, he'd come up out of his grave. But the steam engine was very like in the wintertime, you got 400 gallons in the water in a boiler. And if you drained all that water, the next day, getting that water back, you wouldn't get nothing done.
Mhm.
In the wintertime, you had to chunk it, get big chunks and put in there and keep it warm all night.
Right.
You took steam and blowed the outer pipes out and
Yep.
keep it from freezing. But of course, the diesel, you go out there and turn the
Start
switch.
it
And,
up.
well, you had to, in the wintertime, you had to heat it up a little bit. You got a heater on it.
Yep.
Take it about 15 minutes to heat it up, and then you're ready to go.
So coming back up here to Marshallton, your family played a big part in the cemetery up in Marshallton, and at one time there was the Bradford Friends Cemetery.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the big splinter at this point. So relay what your memories are on how the cemetery split up.
How it started?
Well, you have the Bradford Cemetery, which went way back. There was
Yeah.
some friends.
Well, I don't know too much about the Quaker Cemetery.
Okay.
Only it was started by the Marshalls.
But your cemetery was splintered from the original
Right.
Bradford. So how
Doc-
did that happen?
Dr. Moses Marshall, that would be my great grandfather. He wanted the Quakers to have more freedom of what kind of a monument they could use. If you're any familiar with Quaker cemeteries, they're all little white stones. And he wanted them to have more freedom of what kind of a monument they could use. So he got together with the Youngs and the Lamberns and the Marshalls. They all got together and purchased this 6.3 acres from a woman named Hannah Woodward. That was in 1871. And in 1871, they paid $370 an acre for that, which don't sound like much today, but that was a premium price in 1871. It amounted to about $2,225, I think, was the total price. And Dr. Moses Marshall's wife is buried in the Quaker Cemetery. And he intended to move her to Bradford. But after they bought the ground, he only lived 30 days. He passed away 30 days after they bought it. So he didn't get his wife moved over there. And I found her stone over there in the cemetery. I didn't know where it was, and just this past summer I found the stone.
That's your
his wife.
great grandmother then.
Yeah, and she's in the Quaker Cemetery, and he's in. But like I say,
So he did get buried in the Bradford Cemetery.
Yeah.
And then your family, do you know what it was like? Was there dissension between the two groups, or did they go on amicably? Did they still worship together?
I don't think there's any friction at all.
It was just a matter of
was
we
just
want a headstone and they don't.
But he just wanted them to be able to have what they wanted, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
More or less, we have a limit on what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we can't have mausoleums in there, or there's rules and regulations.
And you've been the caretaker of that cemetery for as long as I know.
56 years.
Any good stories? Anybody come back from the dead? Did you ever
Well,
bury anyone that
everybody's
wasn't dead?
scary about cemeteries, but I've been out there in the dark, and any other time I never seen anybody.
Yeah, I think you ought to tell the story of whatever the couple was that they wanted to change because one of them maybe they'd like that story. The Moores down at the bottom of the hill, Nancy Moore, when her mother passed away, of course we buried her single depth. And I didn't know it, but her father had passed away years ago, and he was buried over in New Jersey. And she come down there one day to me and she says, if we bring Papa over from New Jersey, can we bury him with Mama? I said, yeah. Well,
she said, I said, we'll have to dig, she wanted to put him in the same grave. I said, well, we'll have to dig, bring the other one up. And she says, well, I don't want to put Mama on the bottom because I'm afraid she's going to get claustrophobic. Well, I had to turn around and keep from laughing in her face, tell you the truth. I got myself straightened out and I got to talking to her, but it was kind of comical. I've heard a lot of stories from different people, you know. People are funny, you know. You hear, they got different ideas of these things. But
Have you ever taken care of the Quaker cemetery
No,
in any way, shape,
no.
or form?
no, Bradford was enough for me.
So,
Why don't you tell them about how you got started taking care of the Bradford Cemetery?
Well,
when
it
your
was
dad died.
first person I buried was my father. George Fling who lived in the stone house over here, little stone house next to the hall building. He was caretaker, and he was sick. He was dying with lung cancer, and I called him and I said, "Need a grave open for him today." Well, he says, "I can't do it." Well, he says, "Who's supposed to lay it out?" He says, "I don't know." And I talked to him a while, and I said, "If I get you in my pickup truck and take you down there, our lot's right along the driveway." I said, "Would you show me how to lay a grave out?" And he says, "Yeah, I'll try that." And so we went down there, and he showed me how to lay the grave out. And when we were down there, he says, when I get better in the spring, I'm going to show you everything I know about this place." Because he never wrote anything down. He had it up here. And he could tell you anything you wanted to know walking around there. So come spring, he was gone too. And his wife handed me the charts, and there was 5 names on them. But he had a whole stack of notebook paper with the burials on it, but there was nothing on the charts. I recharted that whole place. And there's still...
just from his notes.
Yeah, but there's stuff in those old cemeteries that nobody will ever know, you know. It's common for old cemeteries. I've talked to people in Maryland, cemeteries in Delaware. It's the same thing in the old cemeteries. The old people didn't realize, I guess, what it would be like, and they didn't really keep good records. So you go with what you got.
Mm-hmm.
And not telling tales out of school. Once in a while you'll hit one.
Yeah.
You know when you're digging. And
Yeah.
it's just a fact of life, that's all. You don't want to do it, but you can't help it.
Yeah. So how old were you when you basically
30
took over?
30 years old.
You've been doing it ever since.
Yeah.
Up until fairly recently. And
Well, yeah, I'm
sure you still
I'm trying to ease my way out.
Yeah.
Uh,
Do you have any young blood to take your
Well, we got members there, but it's hard to get them. You know, you can't put that off. When the undertaker calls you, you got to go ahead and do it. You can't say, "Oh well, I'll see you next week and do it."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not getting the cooperation I should have, really.
Yeah.
But
So let me ask you a question about the Quaker cemetery, if you could remember. There's been a lot of inquiries about where Humphrey Marshall's buried.
well, the only thing I can tell you, when I think I was 6 or 8 years old, my daddy took up her, and I think Ed would remember the big boxwoods in there in the cemetery. But they took all them out, and I don't remember which one. But my daddy took me up there, and he spread the boughs of this boxwood. He said Humphrey Marshall's buried under here. But he never had a headstone. He didn't want a headstone.
Not even a little marker?
He didn't want any marker. So.
And his wife, Mary, was buried next to him too, I think. Was it Mary? His
I
second
think
one?
I think you're right, but I have no idea where it is.
But well, you said it was near one of the boxwoods that was taken out.
Well, yeah, but they're all out there now, and I can't remember which boxwood it would be.
Right.
So I think he'll be resting okay, really. You know,
So I'm always told.
He's probably used to it by now, eh?
I would think so. But, yeah, getting down to the nitty gritty of it, what's the difference?
Right.
We're gone.
Well, there isn't a chart or anything for that cemetery.
No, there was, I guess, but according to what I understand, they lost them. Oh, they'll bury a cremation in there, but that's it. They won't bury any full burials.
Yeah, because it's all filled up, is what I heard. for the
Well,
most part.
I guess it is. I don't know. How do you know?
You don't if you don't have the chart.
That's what I say.
It's all hearsay.
If you don't have any records, and I think Swarthmore is a stronghold for Quaker records.
Right. Right.
But what they have, I have no idea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I never got into the Quaker part of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Franklin. Ed, I'm going to turn to you.
Okay.
I tried to locate it, Ed, but there's a picture of you floating around when you were 5 years old, right next door at the forge. So, what do you do? What did you do in the blacksmith shop back then? Who ran it? What was it like? What do you remember?
Well, I'll tell you what I remember. Bill Ludwig was the blacksmith. His wife's name was Lula. They had Bill Jr., Leah, which is Honey. They had Bob, who was a baseball player, Bob Ludwig. And what was it? Doris was the other daughter. They lived down on Broad Run Road, where that church thing or whatever it is down
Sweet
there
Origin
now.
Church?
Yeah, in that house down there.
Temple
They
house, yeah.
lived in not the little house that has the antique stuff. The property owner owned that and used to come out in the summertime.
Mm-hmm.
But they lived in the bigger house,
Mm-hmm.
the one that's right along the road. But he had the blacksmith shop. Now, my mother, as I told you, my sad tale of woe, you know, she was a young widow and so forth. The way she had money was that she used to clean houses here in Marshallton. And also used to bake bread one day a week and sell bread. I had regular customers who stopped at the house every Friday night and picked up their loaf of bread for the week. And so, being me, a little crumb hopper running around here, somebody had to watch me. So she was, Lula Ludwig was babysitting for me. Now, the problem was that Bill didn't drive. And it was getting to the point there in the 40s where the farmers no longer could spend time bringing their horses up here. Now, some people still did. So he had to go to the farm, so she had to come up and get him, load his stuff in the trunk, and because I was along, I used to go with him.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times then I'd spend the day up here. I remember waking up the street here in the summertime, and you'd hear Bill down here pounding on that anvil. That's the first thing you'd hear in the morning. Him beating on that anvil. It was a certain rhythm. It was bang, 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 bang. So that's why I hung out here. And that picture was taken, in those days there used to be, I don't know, we called them gypsies. I don't know what they were. They used to come around, some of them had a pony, and they'd take your picture, and you'd buy it from them. Well, the gypsies came in, and Bill paid to have our picture taken standing there at the anvil. He had made me a leather apron, I think I have on. And so that's what the picture was from. But my job was when somebody brought a horse here, we had a stick about this long, which had a horse tail nailed on it. My job was to keep the flies off the horse so they wouldn't be kicking while he was trying to put shoes on them.
It's an important job.
And he had a box there where I would stand and grind the bellows, or wasn't bellows, it was a fan type thing for the fire.
That's somewhat ironic that your father was killed by a kicked horse and that you
Well, if you want to get really ironic, my grandfather was a blacksmith. So maybe it's in the blood, I don't know, but I got away from it. It doesn't sound like work to me.
So, did the forge, I think in talking to Jack last time, he said the bellows that's in there now wasn't original.
That wasn't original. It was a fan type thing. It just stood on there and turned like with your hand. This side was somebody had woodworking machinery in here, and I don't know
This
who.
was always known as the cabinet shop, where in the day they made the wooden carriages.
Now, I don't know who had the equipment in here or what. I never remember
I don't
seeing
remember
anybody
anybody
working
ever doing
here.
it here. Yeah.
But because that door was locked.
Okay, so you never really went in here then?
No, this never was in this side that much.
Well, Bill Ludwig blacksmith at Northbrook. We had a building down there, there was a forge in it. And
Before he came up here?
he rented it off my father.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. See.
So the historical records do state that there was a blacksmith shop down there.
Yeah,
Where?
right, where that 3-car garage is now, right there. There was a building there, a garage and a blacksmith shop. And there
Was
was
that
a
an old blacksmith
concrete
shop?
forge in there.
I mean, did it go way back? Do you know?
Well, it wasn't there when I can't remember it being there, but I can remember the old forge.
Mhm.
Because when I built that building, I busted it up to get it out of there.
Mhm.
But I can remember my daddy saying he rented it to Bill Ludwig.
Interesting. So back to the blacksmith shop here. Back in the day when you used to work for Bill Ludwig, was did he predominantly do horseshoeing or did he do hardware?
No,
for
it was
people?
almost 100% horseshoeing.
Mhm.
And that, and the other thing was almost every kid in Marshall had a horseshoe nail ring. He would make a ring out of a horseshoe nail. And almost every kid in Marshallton had one. Damn, I can't find whatever, I don't know what I ever did with it. But I know talking to Kenny Trimble before he died, and I said something to him about it, and he said, you know, I had one, and I gave it to Honey and Dave Johnson, Honey Ludwig, daughter, one that lives up in Pottstown.
Margaret?
Joan lived in
Yeah,
Westchester.
Margaret was.
Margaret, yeah. He gave it to her because he thought, you know, she'd want it because her grandfather had made it. But almost every kid had a horseshoe nail ring.
So did a lot of kids hang out here? other than
They
your
would
son?
stop in. They didn't spend as much time as I did.
Mhm.
But
Jack, you hung out here, didn't you?
Yeah, when I went to school, we could hear the anvil, and you'd stop on the way home from school and crank the bellows, and he had that other anvil he let us beat on. He was always good with kids. I mean, he'd never say no to doing it. We used to put horseshoes in the fire and heat them up. But I still have my horseshoe nail ring now. I couldn't
You
tell you.
do?
I do. But I couldn't tell you exactly where it is right now, but I do have it. Yep.
well, I'll be damned. Darn.
Yep.
Well, now here's a question I asked. I was talking to Can girls about it. When we used to walk to school, now I went up there for first and second part of second grade.
Right.
Now there was an alley between where Can's lived, which is now Verngren's house,
Right. Yep.
and the next house, whoever lives there.
Right.
There was an alley up through there,
Right.
and we used to walk up. That's how we walked up to school. Go across. I'd have to cross the street and go up about 3 houses and go up this alley. Now, is that how you went up too, or did you go up this back alley
We'd go
here?
up by the old. We'd go down here and up
Here
the
by
alley.
Frank and Oscar Long's house.
Right. Yeah.
Did they live there when you?
Henson's lived there.
Henson's lived there. When I was a kid,
Yeah.
there was a black fellow and his son lived there. Frank Long was the black fellow and Oscar was his son. And they had a little barn in the back there in the alley, which they kept a horse in. God knows what they did with that horse. I don't know.
I can remember walking up there to come up and get ice cream with Linwood Becker. And he knew Frank Long.
Oh, yeah.
And they had a big privet hedge in front of the house that you couldn't see, the porch. You couldn't see on the porch.
Right.
and those guys would be in there shooting crap. And I was scared to death. I thought somebody was going to get me. I can remember that well.
I forgot about Lenwood Becker. He used to walk up from North.
Yeah, well, I'd walk up with him, like I say, we'd walk up here and get ice cream cone. And
He was older than you, wasn't he?
oh yeah, quite a bit, but I just like to walk up here and that was something you did in the summertime. You know, you're talking about what we did in the summertime. We down there, we lived right along the Brandywine, and we did a lot of fishing and a lot of skinny dipping, and we had a canoe and a flat bottom boat, and in season we'd go bullfrogging. We'd go up to Glen Hall and float down, shoot bullfrogs, and have a little bullfrog fry.
Franklin, was it good fishing back then?
It was pretty good, yeah. A lot of sunfish, you know, a few suckers. Carp, you didn't want the carp. You catch a carp, he's full of mud, you couldn't eat him.
Yeah. I have a question for you, since I've been around here for a few years too. And I can remember back in the day doing the Marshallton Triathlon and going down to Northbrook. And I am certain that the width of the river has increased greatly since just 30 or 40 years ago, especially in that section there, right by the bridge where they used to put in. Do you feel that it's increased in width?
Well, right above that, yes, it's cutting way over. Years ago, no, this is just what I've been told. You go up Glen Hall Road there, and to get to the top of the hill is the historical sign there, and it says Indian Rock. That's where they named the Indian Rock Farm. They said the Indians used to fish off that rock. If you get down over the bank, there's a rock sticks out. And when I was a kid, the Brandywine was way off of that rock. It had changed its course. It's going right back again. It's cutting that right back out.
Right.
And yeah,
there used to be that little pond there, and that blew out.
It's pretty near got cutting that pond out.
The pond's drained now.
Yeah. That's changing its course again.
Right.
In my lifetime, it's done that twice.
Yeah. Well, I was always told that the Indians, they would do what's called like a triangle with rocks, and they would run the fish upriver to where it got to.
Gig 'em. They were gigging.
Yeah. And I was always told it was in that area there.
Yeah. You go up there. There are not very many remaining, because there's been too many floods. But when I was a kid, you'd go up there and you'd see several of these stone things. And my daddy, I said, what are they? He said the Indians drove the fish in there and they'd spear them.
There you go.
Yeah.
So while we're talking about Indians, there's an Indian burial ground down there. There's a marker there, and they found a cache of stone axes there many years ago, probably before you. Is that something you were aware of back then? I mean, if I were a kid growing up and I knew there was an Indian burial ground, I'd be in there looking for arrowheads.
There was a family on that Indian Knoll farm, which is the one on Glen Hall Road, the first farm up there.
Yeah.
Ralph Edwards, a southerner, used to farm that years ago. And he dug bushel baskets full of stuff out of that burial ground.
Oh, did
Arrowheads, trinkets, Indian trinkets and
out
stuff.
of the burial ground itself?
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of artifacts.
The grove of trees is still there.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a sign.
But
there.
it's been pretty well robbed.
Yeah.
I would imagine you'd still find something, but.
Right. And they did find a cache of axes too in a separate location up by, the old Marshall farm where Jane Julia lives now.
My mother was very friendly with, she was some relation to Indian Hannah. She was Princess Bluefeather. And I got letters that Princess Bluefeather wrote to my mother because they were very friendly. And she ended up living in the old Turk's Head Hotel there in Westchester till she passed away. But I could show you letters from
So while you're talking about Indian Hannah, she lived in a cabin right up on Indian Hannah Road. There used to be a marker up there.
Yeah.
I don't see it there anymore.
Well, if you go up there to the second pond,
Yep.
there's two ponds there.
Yep.
Go past the one, the second
Yep,
pond.
and it's back
If you
on the
look right straight across there, it was right in that bank.
It was on the right there when you go up.
It was on the right.
Yep, back in the hollow there.
Yeah, well, right across, right
Past
where
the-
that upper pond is.
Yeah, yeah. Ed, back to the blacksmith shop. Mr. Ludwig, I think did he retire in 54 or he operated until 54?
I think
Well,
it was
what
around there.
eventually happened?
I'm not sure of the dates,
Mhm.
but it was around that area that he got old and gave up.
Because this blacksmith shop is arguably the oldest running blacksmith shop in Chester County.
Although it's not
Started
running.
in 1750 up until 1954.
Yeah, around then that he gave up. I don't remember when he died, but it was in that neck of the woods. It was after I graduated from high school. I know.
Did he
that.
pay you for coming down here?
No, I was a little kid. I was down here because they were babysitting me, so my mother could go out and clean houses and stuff.
Was it warm in the summertime with the forge going? Do you
Oh
remember?
yeah. But hell, as a kid, warm and cold don't bother you when you're that age. I don't remember anything exciting about it other than I was down here and I was always infatuated with horses because it was in my genes, and so that this would be the ideal place for me to hang out.
And the roof back here, the porch is where they the story goes, they used to haul the wagons up to the second floor.
That's
to dry
before my
and-
time. That's before my time.
But the roof was always here, wasn't it? The,
Yeah.
Overhang.
Yeah, that roof was there because he used to have the horses under there. He'd show them under that shed back there. We'd open that back door on that side and tie the horse out back.
Okay, so
And there used to be I noticed when I came in here today, the pump. There was an iron
Iron pump,
basin
yeah.
in front of that. I don't know what,
I think
somebody
it's
steal
still
it?
around back here.
Oh.
Yeah. So we're going to touch on one more item here. We're almost out of time. And Jack, you can chime in here too. But Ed, tell us about, you were a West Bradford Township supervisor back in the day. And tell us why you became a supervisor, what was the zoning like back then, what time period it was, and Jack's in your shoes now, but I know he was involved in the township back then too.
Not in my day, he wasn't. He was a kid then.
Right, I know, but well, what about back
Still
in your,
am.
what was it like back in your day?
All right,
Well, why did-
I was elected supervisor in 1961. The reason I ran for supervisor, one night, on a Thursday night after work night, we were over at the bar, the inn, at the hotel at that point.
You might explain it. Work night was the
Work
training
night
night
was
for the
Thursday
firehouse.
night in the firehouse. You went up and, act like you were cleaning the engines and fixing things up and all that. And there was 3 or 4 of us that went over to the bar, and Hen Jeffries, who was the owner of it, thought he himself as a great politician, along with a few other things. But we got talking politics and local politics. And Dorothy Hurdick at that point was a Republican committee woman here in West Bradford. And so they had picked a slate of candidates for her to be supervisor, tax collector, and auditor. And so Hen was saying, he could, pick anybody up and they could beat the party's candidates. So with enough beers in you, and I had been president of the fire company, and I was a little upset with the supervisors because they were only giving the fire company like $600 a year. So I said to him, well, I'd run for supervisor. So I don't know whether he got the papers or I went in and got the papers, but I ran for supervisor. Niels Edwards ran for tax collector, and Fenimore, Richard Fenimore,
Dick?
yeah, ran for auditor in the primary. And who was I running against? Lead? Somebody out on Marshallton Road by the airport. But so we got the papers filed and all that, and I got on the ballot. And I know Dorothy Hurdy called me one day and said, how about coming out and talking to me? Because she was on the ballot for county treasurer. And there was a lot of judges going on in that election. It was a pretty big election here in the county. And she said to me, how about withdrawing so we don't have any disturbance here in the county and this and that. And I said, no, I think I'll stay on. And so I did, and I went out and visited probably 5 or 6 houses, because that's not my thing. Mm-hmm. Asking people to tell how great I am, although, if they get me started, I was shy back then. So, but Hen went out, and he knew everybody in the township at that point. There was only about 900 people, if I remember right. And so we ran, and I won. The other two, Niels Edwards and Fenimore, didn't win just as well, because Barwell beat whoever the Republican candidate was anyway, and, as tax collector. But so I became a supervisor. And the township code says that the Board of Supervisors shall have an organization meeting on the first Monday of the year. And they used to meet over in the Grange Hall. So first Monday of the year, I get myself all dressed up, come up there. Ain't a soul around. Nobody shows up. What the hell's going on? But when I called Horace Rogers, who was then the township secretary, I said, Horace, what's that? He said, oh, we don't pay any attention to that. And I thought, oh, this is going to be fun. Well, Gilbert Gray was the chairman of the Board of Supervisors at that point. Now, Gilbert lived out in the house on Marshallton Road there with his Uncle Harry. And who else was on there? Bill Smith. Bill Smith was the other supervisor. Well, so I went on there, and I found out why the township was poorer than the fire company was. I found out that. I mean, we got paid $6 a month as supervisors. And we had to wait until after April when the liquid fuels tax came in before we got paid. We didn't get paid for the first 3 months because the township didn't have that $6 to pay us. And we had Gilbert Gray, as I said, was his chairman. His Uncle Harry was roadmaster, and he should have been retired at least 5 years before that. And then I went in office, and sometime during the beginning of January, I came home from work. I worked at Foot and Mineral Company at that point. I came home from work, or did I work? I don't know where I worked, but I was working someplace. I came home from work. I was still living at home. I wasn't married yet. And eating supper, and somebody knocks on the door, and it was snowing. And here it was Harry Gray. He says, it's your turn to plow snow tonight. And I thought, oh, hell, I had driven a fire engine. That was about the only truck I ever drove in my life. I never plowed snow. Well, we went down Wawaset Road and turned up Can Road and got about to where that riding stable is now, where Charlie Can used to live. And I did something, popped the clutch or something, and broke the axle. And there we sat. Fortunately, in those days, it wasn't Homeland Security. What was it? It was protecting us.
Civil defense.
Civil defense.
Yep.
And they had a big four-wheel drive Army vehicle up in the firehouse because we had an empty bay, and they were keeping it up there. Well, Dave Johnson brought it down and pulled the township truck up the road and got us off there. And I don't remember what happened after that, other than I know.
They never asked you to plow snow again.
Well, they did. About 2 nights later, they had me out again, but this time they had me on the International Harvester tractor with a V plow in front of it on Broad Run Road. They weren't going to let me drive a truck, but we had to go get another truck. So we went over to Cone's Junkyard, and that's where we bought our truck from. And I thought, this ain't gonna work, you know. Well, fortunately, in the next, I don't know whether it was the next year or the year after that, I became chairman of the board. And Pricey Stevenson, whether he was on the board or whether he was building inspector, I'm not sure which one. But between him and me, we talked the other ones into going out and buying a damn brand new truck.
Mm-hmm.
And which we did. We bought an International, whatever that, some kind of Star or something. But that was an interesting experience. Now, you asked about zoning.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a time in the 60s, I guess, where development was starting to happen around.
Well, Manley had bought Crestmont Farms,
Mhm.
Lee Manley.
But there wasn't any zoning when you first.
Wasn't any zoning when I went out. When I came in there, we finally got a subdivision regulations passed, so we had a little control on what the streets ended up like. But that was about it. But the zoning, I had said, we're going to put zoning in. John Griggs, who I guess he lived down to Renshaw Farm, didn't he?
Yeah, Griggs lived down there.
Yeah, he was the general manager of Pepperidge Farm in Downingtown. He was chairman of the planning commission. And he and I got together and we decided we were going to put a zoning ordinance in here. Well, in those days, before the Pennsylvania Municipal Planning Code came into effect, if 51% of the assessed valuation signed a petition saying they didn't want zoning, you couldn't adopt a zoning ordinance for 5 years. So this was in about my 3rd year in office that we decided we were doing this, and Harry Can led the fight and hired a lawyer from Westchester, and they got a petition up and signed 51% of the assessed valuation. And so we couldn't put zoning in, so zoning didn't come in until after I went out. And as a matter of fact, then when I came up for re-election, that same group decided we're going to get rid of this SOB, and they did. They
So you were
ran
one term, right?
one term.
Mhm.
That was one term. Bunny Meister took my place,
Yep, and we all know what happened after that.
and then Horace Rogers said, "I'm not working with these people." He says, "I'm quitting." In fact, he was at that point, I think, no longer manager of Beloit Eastern. I think he started an insurance business in Westchester. He didn't really need the grief anymore, secretary treasurer. So he told the new board, "I'm quitting." So right before the new year and the new board came in, Bunny Meister stopped down at my house and said, "How about you being secretary treasurer for us?" He says, "We got to have somebody that knows what's going on." And so I was then secretary treasurer for the next 6 years. So I left and went to East Cowan as township manager. And spent 30 years over there because nobody else would have me, so there I was. That's.
All right.
But there was some interesting, Lee talked about development, it's away from Marshallton, and maybe I'm taking too much time. But Lee Manley had bought those 2 farms out on Marshallton Thorndale Road, which became Crestmont Farms. And he was selling lots for $2,500 an acre. And he was financing them. And he was letting people start to build their houses, before they had the lot paid for, and then they'd find out they couldn't get a mortgage, and Lee had ended up with whatever house was there, he ended up with. because I know when I got married, I went to him and said, Lee, I know you have a few houses. I said, my wife and I are looking for a place. So he handed me about 6 or 7 keys with addresses on. He says, go look at them and see if, well,
So did you end up buying one then?
no, my wife didn't like any of them, so
Mhm.
we ended up on Manorwood Drive.
Okay, and you've been there ever since. So gentlemen, any last comments? We're about winding down here. Anything we missed? Any parting shots at anyone else?
The only thing that comes to my mind as we sat here and talked more and more, there are different people. I mean, there was Irene. I have no idea what old Irene's last name was.
Harris.
What?
Harris.
Harris, was
Harris.
it? Old Irene.
Called her Ducky.
Yeah, she walked like a duck.
Yeah.
Well,
was-
she wore her shoes on the
Well,
wrong feet.
Well, she, right.
She used to.
Which-
She used to do her laundry one day a week. We were kids, and she had those bushes outside of her house, and she only had one set of clothes. So she'd come out, she'd wash her clothes, and come out there in the nude, and lay all the
I
clothes
don't
on.
know whether I wanted to see that.
Yeah, it wasn't a pretty
kid.
sight.
And another old resident we don't want to forget is Charlie Bryson.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes,
he
indeed.
was also worked for the township.
Yes, sir. Yes, indeedy. Yes,
Yes,
sir.
indeed.
Yes, indeedy.
And there was old Zay that worked
Yeah.
for
Down
Ashby.
at
He lived up at Ashby's, and every night he'd walk past my house, walk on up to the hotel and get a couple bottles of beer, and had a burlap bag that he carried them in. And he'd take it down. He lived in a little house down at Ashby's, which is where,
Pam and Nick Volpone live.
I want to throw something in here about Hen Jefferson. You know, Hen was a pretty good BSer. We were up at the Spit and Chew Club there one night and we were sitting there. Harry Can was in there, and Earl Johnson, and I don't know who all, but anyhow, Hen got to talking about where he worked different times. And after a bit, Harry Can says, wait a minute, Hen, he says, how old are you? And I think Hen said about 70. Well, he says, I've been counting up, and he says, you're at least 150. and then they got into it, and about what Hen knew. And Harry Can said to Hen, he says, you know, you know enough to fill a book. But he said, what you don't know would fill a volume.
That's a good one.
That's some of the
Yeah.
garbage that went on among them up there.
Well, Earl Johnson, who lived up at the corner, and they were kind of tight. He and Winnie.
very
We-
Little?
And we used to tease them because we always said they had one light bulb, a 15-watt light bulb, and you could see that light bulb, you know, a light would go out and then it'd come walk on in a different part of the house. They'd carry that one light bulb around the house and screw it in where they're on. And we had dinners over at the firehouse. They always come over and bought one dinner, but they wanted to know we'd give them 2 rolls. So they'd take it back over the house there and then split it. They wouldn't go for buying 2 dinners at a time.
Another thing I remember about, they were sitting there one night and Earl was going to go to Florida. And Hen says, well, if you go to Florida, Earl, would you send me a card? He said, I'll give you the card and the pen and the stamp. He says, would you send me a card from Florida? Earl said, sure. And a couple weeks later after he got back, we're sitting up there and Hen says, where's my card? He says, you tight bastard. He says, you kept the card and the stamp and the envelope, didn't even send it to me.
Well, you talk about how tight they were, but Earl died first, and then Winnie died
Right.
later. She left the church up here $750,000.
Well, that's all there's.
Yeah, I know, but
electricity didn't use.
they deprived themselves of a
Yeah.
decent living.
Yep.
But they had plenty of money.
Yeah.
That was a
It was sad.
Yeah.
Now Earl was a good friend of my dad's, I'm told.
He was a good man, don't get
Yeah.
me wrong. He'd do anything, he'd do
Yeah.
you a favor in a minute.
Yeah.
But they deprived themselves of a decent life.
Well, I tell you, when we lived down here one Easter, our oil burner quit on the east, you know, on Saturday or something like that. Ed's brother Bill stopped down. We were involved with the fire company all the time. He stopped down for something, and he says, "It's cold in this house." I said, "Yeah, the oil burner quit. I don't know what I'm gonna do." Well, he left. The next thing you know, he and Earl come down. Earl found an old oil burner insert, the motor and everything, and brought it down, put it in, said, you know, there you go. And that's the way things happen. I mean, Earl, Vance Matlack helped me do a lot of the plumbing down the house. He'd tell me what to do. He had a stroke, he couldn't work, and he'd tell me how to do things and use his tools. So that's the way it was around here. It was good. People would take care of each other.
You could call Earl at 3 o'clock in the morning and he'd be there.
Yep.
It didn't matter. But I sold him a push mower for $35, a lawn boy. And they're about as easy as a starting thing as you can start. And he took it home. I started it down there and he brought it up here. He wasn't 20 minutes, he's back down there, so it won't start. He was too weak to crank it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I said, Earl, why don't you get yourself a little riding mower and enjoy it? Oh, he says, I can't afford that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way he was.
Yeah.
And they had money to burn.
Yeah. Marshallton had a dump too at one
A
time.
dump,
Yeah.
other than the berries?
Down off Clayton Road. Down where Johnsons live. You know where Johnson's house is? Well, you get down about
Before Camp Linden?
Charlie
No,
John, right across
Clayton
from
Road.
Yerkes.
Clayton Road.
Clayton
Oh,
Road.
Clayton Road, okay.
Right across
Before
from
you
Yerkes.
get down to the development where
Yeah,
the prayers and them live, there's a hollow and then you go up around and then there's a farm and down that hollow. People used to take your stuff down there and throw it off.
okay.
Because when our development was built, Sam Massarella, who moved in probably in about 1970 or something like that, he was a junk hound and he walked back through there and he started digging up and he came out of there with all kind of old bottles that were people had thrown in there over the years. So.
Well, it's been fun. I hope you've had as much fun as we have listening to you.
Well,
Thank you.
I don't know whether I did any good or not. I spilled out something.
Yeah.
No,
Well, we could come
I
back.
wanna
We
look
could,
at these.
we could take a couple weeks and make up some more stuff and come back again, right?
Yeah.